it's the stretch run of the season towards the playoffs. The Mavericks currently sitting, is that 6th last time I checked?
Did they move to 6th? I thought they were 7th.
Were they 7th? Okay, very good. That's where my memory is right now. However, look, they made some trades, trade deadline. You got 6 games after the trade deadline, and they have won those 6 games. This team looked better in a very small sample size, but they want to get work done in the stretch run and give themselves an opportunity to go and contend and compete in the remainder of the season, and then, of course, into the NBA playoffs. And with that being the case, I asked the question, which Maverick is most important to their success in this stretch run? As there's some figuring out they need to do. There's some recalibrating they need to do. 877-881-1053. That's the truckwreck.com text line if you would like to get involved. Blake, who immediately jumps to mind for you when I ask you this question of which Maverick is most important to the stretch run success?
I think it's a great question. I do want to.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you.
I do want to be up and honest that there is no perfect one answer, because if we don't say one person and we're like, well, what if this person's hurt? Well, of course, we're assuming everyone's playing at their natural.
And you know what? We'll get around to most of them. That's how the segment works. We'll throw out a whole bunch of ideas, and eventually we've talked about all the people.
We'll play them at their natural. The guy that jumps out to me the most is PJ Washington, and that might be obvious. It might not be. It's the piece that I think was very underrated in the trade of getting him, because I know Gafford put up the huge numbers and all that stuff, but with Lively being back in the fold and not being hurt, I know he's still probable with the nose fracture, but obviously with him playing and being healthy, we won't see as much of Gafford. We will still see him, just as much. PJ Washington is going to be starting down the stretch during the rest of these games in the playoffs. Like, he is going to be that guy. And for me, we kind of know what to assume with Luka and Kyrie, especially recent. PJ Washington, if he can be that third scorer for you, I don't need 35 a night, but if he can give me 15 to 18 a night, an occasional 12, an occasional 20, but 15 to 18 a night, I think that's really nice for this Dallas Mavericks, because I feel like they're still missing that third guy when Kyrie and Luka get double teamed. That's someone they can really go get a bucket by themselves and not have to be open because of Luka and Kyrie, because there's gonna be times where they're off the court. And I feel like if PJ Washington takes that step and kind of what he was in Charlotte, being a prolific scorer, and now he's getting more and more comfortable, and then obviously his defensive side of the ball.
Right. I was surprised that you started with offense as like a third scorer, because I think that you could end up by the end of the season where he has not fully figured out his offense to the point that you of like satisfaction for what I imagine is Mavs fan. Actually, let me not speak for Mavs fan, for myself personally, because I would love him to be a 3-point shooter, at least spot up, when Luka gets in the ball, as Luka tends to do. However, he's not, you look at his numbers over his career, he's not been a great 3-point shooter.
A little bit below average.
And so it might be a lot to expect him over the course of a couple of weeks to all of a sudden find it, even though he's going to get a lot of open looks and those types of things, right? Even with his open looks, his shooting percentage hadn't been great. That might be something that you need to expect over off season and having the time to really develop that portion of it. The thing that he brings that is that for me feels like the front, the top of his resume, like the key thing that you're going to list out when you're talking about PJ Washington, is defends other teams' best player, which is something this team hasn't had, particularly to the degree that PJ Washington brings it, for a while. What the last guy that you feel like did that really comfortably? Dorian Finney-Smith?
Yeah, I was going to say Dorian Finney-Smith. And the thing now is you got him and Green. So if you match up against the Suns, let's just say, for instance, which we do tomorrow and then maybe in the playoffs, you now can, I feel pretty comfortable deploying Josh Green on Devin Booker, and you can go deploy PJ Washington on Kevin Durant. I'm not saying Kevin Durant's not going to score the basketball. He's still going to get his, but it's not. I
don't know, Russ. It sounded like he was saying PJ Washington's going to lock down KD.
I definitely heard that too.
Thank you.
But there is a such thing as PJL. PJ He's been putting some good players, the likes of Wemby, and then when he was in OKC versus Shea and all those guys, he's done a good job defending these guys. And if he is someone that you can deploy on a team's best player and hold them to right below their average or right at their average, and then not just take over the game and also gives you a little bit of a scoring boost, I think that's going to be the thing that puts this team over the top, that I think the casual fans outside of Dallas Mavericks faithful, like you guys, of course, don't notice. They just kind of say, oh, PJ Washington, whatever. Like, he could be someone that all of a sudden Kevin Durant's not going off when you play them, and now you're just going Luka versus Devin Booker, and I would take Luka over Devin Booker as far as them going back and forth trading buckets. So PJ Washington can play a really integral piece of this. I think he's the most important piece that's going to be the reason that they go far or don't go far, in my mind, is going to be the guy they acquired at the trade deadline from Charlotte and PJ Washington.
I like that answer. Good answer, Blake. As we continue, we turn it to the truckwreck.com text line, 877-881-1053, as I ask the question, which Maverick is most important to the success of this team down the stretch run of the season, which from the 2-on-4, 27.3 games is literally a third of the season. So there you go, right? During the last third of the Mavs season in the NBA, from the 9-1-8 and from the 2-1-4. Luka Doncic.
Yep.
Yes.
Yes,
obviously. But I think also there is the degree of, clearly, he's offensively, the metronome of this team. He's the best player on the team. I think also, the defensive effort that he has shown is not something to be ignored.
You know how I am,
right.
I got to clap it up for my boy. He has shown the effort.
And what's funny is I think that I'm not necessarily as high on the defense that he has brought as some others, but it's still worth noting, right? It's still important. And I think that when you see the ways in which Nick Angstadt was just talking to the G-Bang Nation about an hour ago, right? When you see the ways in which the entire team brings effort, Luka Doncic is a part of that, right?
And we're starting to see it even when he, usually it was when he would score. I'm not saying it's an every time thing, but we're starting to see a little bit of Reggie, even when he doesn't score. He's like, okay, let me lock in, play defense, and get the ball back.
And so I think that when he is locked in and focused, I think it gives all the other players on the team no excuse than to be locked in and focused, and they can be a solid defensive team. They can be a passable defensive team when that is the case, and then the offense can take over.
I mean,
so
what were they rated? I think they were the third rated defensive team when they went to the Western Conference Finals with Brunson and Finney-Smith and those boys. And I would say PJ Washington can be your Finney-Smith replacement. Obviously, we've had the Kyrie Brunson discussed 1,000 times, but I'm saying the sum of the makeup is still there. I don't think it's improbable to be, hey, this team, when they really need to turn it up, could be a good defensive team. And we've talked about this in links and done segments on their defensive capability.
I think the issue with that is if you're talking about the postseason is less about what you can do and more about what you can't do, and then they start hitting pressure points, and that's when Kyrie, Luka Doncic come here and dance is going to end up being the things where the teams might match up hunt, and then now they're putting Luka Doncic in ISO circumstances. Can you defend ISO consistently, even if you're going to give some level of effort? Are we going to kill your legs by doing that? But that's down the road. We don't need to think about that. Who are going to be the most important players down the stretch run? How do you like this for an answer from the 469? Derek Lively being able to handle the bigs. And there's some other people from the 940 mentioning another guy that you traded for, Daniel Gafford. And some people are even going as far as just pairing them together.
100%.
Which, do you feel like one, the other, both of them? How do you feel like with that answer?
I think honestly it goes kind of on Jason Kidd. I'm saying both of them / Jason Kidd. How does Jason Kidd play them when you play against certain matchups? Is Derek, because I've talked about it, Derek Lively's a lot quicker laterally, he's younger, he can move around. We know that. Daniel Gafford's more size, brute strength down low for your bigger bigs that are more traditional bigs. Yeah. If Jason Kidd manipulates the lineup well enough where when the other team's center and they're matching it, whether it's they're trying to stretch the floor and he puts Maxey out there, they're trying to play big and he has Gafford out there, or they're playing more traditional and he has Lively out there. If he manipulates that well and has the correct person on the court, then I think each guy has their pros and cons, and Jason Kidd can put them in the correct situation. So I don't necessarily put it on one player, because I think from what Lively is getting better every game we see. But for the most part, we kind of know what he is this season. He's not going to all of a sudden start jacking up threes and guarding the one. We know what he's good at this season. It might change next season. Sure. We know what Gafford's good at this season. We know what Maxey's good at. If Jason Kidd manipulates and does to their strengths the best that he can and puts the right matchups out there, that's what I think will be most important when it comes to the center rotation. Yeah, you got to the answer that I ultimately wanted to deploy. I wanted to wait till towards the end of the segment, so I didn't. No, it's cool. It's because on the truckwreck.com text line from the 214, Jason Kidd is most important. He goes as far as to say, trust the young guys. Would love to see Omax as an X factor. I don't think Omax has the seasoning yet. I think he needs some time. But I think one of the things that the trade deadline illustrated is Nico Harrison has done a great job over two major transition points is what I'll call them for lack of a better term. You had last offseason, you had this trade deadline. Over those two situations, he's done a great job of flipping the team and trying to address as best as possible a lot of the weaknesses of this team. And more importantly, giving the head coach the groceries, so to say, to work with. Now it is up to Jason Kidd to cook, right? And so now that you have cards to play, are you going to play them in the right sequence? Are you going to play them in the right order? Are you going to play them to the maximum of their abilities?
And so I think that now you're going to see more of these things fall on Jason Kidd in just like a general sense of you got basically not an entirely new team. You know what a lot of these guys are, but this is a new team. And so you need to do some figuring out of what rotation works here, what rotation works there. When we want to go small, what's the best 5 for that, right? And that takes a little bit of poking and prodding. But on top of that, people have questions about Jason Kidd and his ability to utilize his team. Yeah. And so all of those things he's going to have to step up in that regard, for lack of a better term. And so I think that that's going to be the big thing for me. He's going to be the important factor of now you've got guys that can do these things. Are you going to put them in the right places? So it's Jason Kidd and, of course, the remainder of the coaching staff, all the other guys, Sean Sweeney, Jared Dudley. Like, there's a lot of people that you can mention. But Jason Kidd, I think that he's going to be the important one.
I think another good point was pointed out. I was going to get to this, but shout out to the Tolos for being ahead of the game from the 9th row. Don't overlook what Dante Exum can mean to this team once he's healthy. And I don't know if I want to put it all on Exum because we're after the All-Star break and he is still out for the game tomorrow against the Suns. So it seems like the knee is not obviously healed. He's obviously not even probable or questionable. He's still just out. So I don't want to. I'm more so putting it on that backup ball handler, whether it be Jaden Hardy, whether it be Dante Exum. I know kind of Hardaway in a sense. But that guy I think is going to be really important when you come to these playoff pushes and the playoff in general, because Luka and Kyrie love them. They're not going to play the entire game. Like, there's going to be some splits where they are off the court. And we've seen when they're not on the court, the offense doesn't run as smooth, which is pretty known with most teams. But some teams, you have a Tyus Jones, like Derek White before he was starting with Boston. Like, they can really run the second unit and can still keep going. And I think that's what Dante Exum did. He wasn't your starting point guard for a reason. Obviously he got slotted in to start it a little bit at the 3. Injuries. But I thought he was one of a really good backup for us. And I think they're really missing that little piece for when Luka and Kyrie are on the court. Not a guy that can score, but a guy that can set up the offense, a guy that can control the pace, a guy that can kind of set up the different actions and not get out of control. Because I love Hardy, and I think Hardy might be kind of that X factor as well. Mm-hmm. But we've also seen moments where he gets a little excited, where he dribbling off his foot, where he's kind of jacking up shots. He's gotten a lot better this last month. I think has been one of his better months as far as efficiency has gone. He shot the ball really well, especially I think it was that OKC game. He was knocking down threes. That next ball handler is going to be really important for me for when Luka and Kyrie aren't on the court, who can set up the offense. I'm not talking about scoring the ball, who can set up the offense. And I'm looking at Hardy or Exum. Obviously Hardy was being young, Exum was being hurt. One of those guys got to step up into that role.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point, as you don't have, especially with Exum hurt until he gets back, you don't have anybody that you feel really super confident about running the offense. You're still going to have the staggered minutes where Kyrie is there and then those types of things. On the YouTube, Finesse on the YouTube said, Dwight Powell, it's important he stay on the bench. And I was like, that's not wrong. You didn't have to say it, but you're not wrong.
I love Dwight Powell. Great guy.
Great guy, right?
And, like, I'm glad the role he's getting now, because I think he's getting a little less hate, because everyone acts like he demanded to start. And now that he's in his role as the 3rd, 4th center and he gets his cleanup minutes, and I'd be clapping when he gets buckets. I know everyone loves to hate on him and make him punching bag, but I'm like, you know what? I'm happy for bro. He's doing his thing. He's got his goggles on there. He's trying his hardest. I don't think he is actively trying to be bad or try to hurt the Like, he is trying his hardest.
I would hope not, but yeah.
And people are like, and I've been guilty of this before. Like, oh my God, wasn't it's like, well, he didn't say, kids, start me or I'm leaving the team. Like, he's not demanding that. We just had injuries and nobody else. So he was doing the best of his ability.
I mean, the frustration obviously is just, it's directed at him a lot of times, and maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe it should be directed other places, but yeah. And then finally, before we go, a few people have mentioned 214, number one, Kyrie has to stay healthy, but then also just the ways that this team, 929 says the Mavs are a way different team if Kyrie isn't playing.
100% agree. We've seen how they looked this last month.
The thing for me is he's clearly going to be important down the stretch run, because he gives you a different card to throw, especially in closing moments. And I think, I'm not saying anything incredibly novel. He is almost even more important once you get to the playoffs.
He's a playoff riser.
Because there's that, but then also now when you need closing moments, hell, we saw the Milwaukee Bucks just kind of uproot what they were doing to go get Damian Lillard. That is a closing situation. That is we need a guy to make sure that we can close out games. Luka Doncic clearly has some of that. But having a different type of closer in Kyrie Irving gives them a level of versatility to finish out games. And I think was something that they needed. And clearly, this is the first time that you're going to have an opportunity, I think, for him to showcase those things for your Dallas Mavericks.
I mean, what do you do at the end of the game? You got to you got to double somebody. If you don't double and you let Luka and Kyrie ISO for the game, I can almost guarantee you. I think if they're not one of the top 5 in clutch teams in the NBA when the game's within 5 minutes and within 5 points, they're either one or they're in the top 5.
Yeah, they've been legitimately one of, if not the best team.
Like, what do you do especially in the playoffs? What do you do?
You make sure you try and make sure it isn't in a clutch situation against these Mavericks. And so I think ultimately one of the things as we go around and talk about the guys that we feel are going to be the most important Maverick down their stretch run is pointing to the different ways in which they have a lot of guys that can impact games. And so ultimately they're going to have to do that over the final 27 games of the season.